It is said that some places do not sit on the earth the way ordinary places do. They rest as if the world itself is holding them gently, not wanting to wake them. In forgotten corners of the earth, there's a fold of central Japan where the ridgelines gather like quiet guardians and cedar forests breathe out a green dusk even at noon. Mist lives there like an old prayer, arriving without footsteps, leaving without farewell. This land is called Iga, and it is not introduced with trumpets or banners. It is introduced with silence. Whispers tell us the first gate into Iga is not a wall, but a pass. At dawn, when the sky is still unsure of itself, half pearl, half ash, a lone traveler walks a narrow mountain path. The stones underfoot are damp with night. The air tastes of pine resin and cold stream water. Somewhere below, unseen, a river speaks in a low voice, as if it is reciting something ancient to itself. Then, half buried at the edge of the path, there is a marker. A small stone, worn smooth by centuries of rain, its edges softened until it seems less carved than grown. Lichen has crept across it in slow devotion, swallowing part of the inscription the way moss swallows a fallen temple. The traveler kneels, as though before an altar, and brushes away a little green veil with trembling fingers. But the words do not fully appear. They remain half-hidden, like a name spoken only in the mind. Beneath the silence, a question forms, not loud, not demanding, but gentle and persistent. How can people become famous for vanishing and still leave a trace that sings through time? Some believe the mountains themselves chose secrecy long before any human learned it. And so, the traveler continues onward, moving deeper into the valley where the light changes, where even the sun seems to arrive carefully, filtered through cedar branches like torchlight through sacred halls. In this realm, sound behaves differently. A distant bird call feels nearer than it should. A footstep feels too loud, then suddenly too soft. The world begins to teach a lesson without speaking. Where memory fades, the land becomes a teacher. The outer roads fall away behind, and the traveler reaches hidden valleys, small, sheltered places that feel less like a province and more like a chamber. Not a chamber of stone, but of agreements. It is said that in Iga, power once lived in weaving, not in shouting, not in a single lord's banner, but in a net of families, households bound by oaths so quiet they could be mistaken for daily routine. A passing bowl of rice, a shared rope coil, a lantern covered early, a door closed with no fear, only habit. It is not the kind of history that shines. It is the kind that settles into the soil. Some believe the mountains trained the eyes, that survival here required seeing not only what was present, but what was missing. A footprint that stops too suddenly, a fire that burns too cleanly, a path that looks open, but feels watched. Others whisper the shrines trained the heart, that the old cedar sanctuaries, those torii gates darkened by rain, taught restraint, taught listening, taught reverence for the unseen. A bell rung at an unusual hour, a rope of straw heavy with dew, a stone fox softened by moss, still watching with a gaze that does not blink. And in the center of this quiet world, another idea begins to rise like mist. Perhaps the art of vanishing was not an act of spectacle, but a way of living. Not an identity shouted into legend, but a discipline carried like breath, silent, steady, and shared. And yet, as we drift deeper into the folds of memory, the first soft contradiction arrives. The shinobi are everywhere in stories. They move through the world's imagination like shadows across lantern walls, unseen, unstoppable, certain. Their names appear in scrolls and rumors, in tavern tales and court whispers. They become symbols. They become masks. But their beginnings, true beginnings, feel like fog, present, undeniable, and impossible to hold. It is said that what is written down becomes heavier, and what is heavy cannot vanish. So perhaps the origin of Iga's hidden craft did not survive because it was destroyed, but because it was never meant to survive in ink at all. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. In those valleys, the traveler notices small things, objects that seem ordinary, yet carry the weight of intention. A length of rope coiled neatly, as if it must be ready without being obvious. A bundle of herbs drying beside a hearth. Healing, not harming. A smooth stone placed at a crossroads, not as decoration, but as a silent marker for those who know how to read it. Even the architecture feels like it has learned humility. Houses sit low, not reaching for attention. Paths curve instead of marching straight. Walls do not boast, they shelter. And the forest is a veil that welcomes anyone who walks softly. Marked by the moon, the landscape itself becomes a scripture. The traveler pauses near a stream, where the water curls around stones and spirals, as if tracing a symbol too old for language. Above, the sky begins to lighten, but the mist remains, lingering like a thought that refuses to leave. The traveler realizes something with a quiet ache. To enter Iga is not only to travel into a place, it is to travel into a way of knowing, a way that honors uncertainty, a way that treats silence as sacred, a way that believes not everything must be claimed by certainty to be real. Whispers tell us that history often tries to pin the shinobi down, to make them clear, complete, and easily held. But Iga resists this. The valley keeps its secrets with gentle hands. It offers only hints, a worn marker stone, a shrine bell, a cedar shadow, a path that disappears at the edge of sight. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the mountain hides its names not out of cruelty, but out of care. Because names can be hunted, names can be taken, names can be used to summon fire. But what is unnamed can sometimes endure. As evening returns, the traveler finds no grand revelation, no single scroll unrolled beneath a torch, no triumphant truth spoken aloud, only the wind moving through pine needles, making a sound that is almost like distant footsteps. Not loud footsteps, not chasing footsteps, just a faint suggestion that something once moved here, and may still move here, in the spaces between breath. The traveler looks back toward the pass, now swallowed by mist, and feels the strange comfort of not knowing fully. Beneath the silence, Iga remains, a held breath, a veiled gate, a trace that sings, not in words, but in atmosphere. And as the night settles, the listener is left with a final, gentle thought. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only felt, like starlight on cedar leaves, like an echo in a hidden valley, where the mountains keep their names, and let the world drift softly into sleep. It is said that fire has two hungers. One hunger is honest, warming hands, cooking rice, keeping winter at the door. But the other hunger is older and quieter. It feeds on names. It feeds on vows. It feeds on the fragile paper heart of memory. Beneath the silence of a darkened courtyard, a single ember floats. It drifts upward like a small wandering star, an ember that should have died, yet insists on glowing. The air is still, heavy with the scent of old smoke that never fully left. And there, at the edge of the courtyard, a storehouse leans as though it is tired of standing. Its beams are charred. Its roof has fallen inward like a bowed head. The wood has been blackened into a kind of permanent night. The ground holds a thin layer of ash like gray snow. We do not rush. We listen, because after burning, the world becomes strangely quiet. Quiet in a way that does not feel empty, but crowded with what is missing. A silence made of vanished ink, of broken seals, of scrolls that once held breath and law and lineage, now reduced to dust that clings to the hems of ghosts. Where memory fades, a question arrives gently, like a hand resting on the listener's shoulder. What becomes of history when its paper heart is set alight? Whispers tell us that in Iga, where stories later bloom loud and bright, where the idea of shinobi drifts through centuries like mist, there is a strange absence at the beginning. The earliest threads feel pulled from the loom, leaving only frayed ends. There are names that should be there, but are not. Dates that should anchor the tale, but instead dissolve. The story begins, and then it seems to hesitate. Marked by the moon, the ember continues to glow, as if refusing to agree with forgetting. Some believe the burning was conquest, an act of power meant to erase, to unmake, to silence a place that would not bend. They imagine men arriving with torches and certainty, gathering ledgers, cracking wax seals with impatient fingers, feeding paper to flame until the air itself became a witness. They imagined smoke rolling over cedar ridges, carrying away the soft weight of generations. Others believed something quieter. They believed the keepers of the archive did it themselves, not in panic, but in ceremony. In forgotten corners of the earth, there are traditions where destruction can be a form of protection, where the only way to keep a secret from being taken is to return it to the elements. Fire becomes not an enemy, but a veil. Ash becomes a lock. The archive is not stolen, it is released. If this is true, the act would not have been hurried. It would have been slow. A candlelit ritual. Scrolls laid in careful stacks like offerings. Seals removed with reverence, not violence. Names read aloud one last time, not as a performance, but as a farewell. And then the flame, not roaring like a beast, but breathing like a living thing. One by one, the pages curl. The ink becomes smoke. The paper becomes starlight for a moment, glowing edges, bright as moth wings, then collapses into gray, drifting silence. Here, forbidden knowledge is not a treasure chest. It is a wound, one that keeps reopening each time a curious hand brushes the past, hoping to find something solid beneath the story. Because the shinobi, those shadows that later tales adore, are defined by secrecy. Yet the world, in its restless hunger, demands proof. Show us your beginnings, it says. Show us the names. Show us the records. And the valley, in its old humility, answers with ash. We linger over the surviving hints, because hints are all that remain, small, trembling lights at the edge of a much larger darkness. A song without an author. It is sung softly in a village, perhaps while washing rice, perhaps while mending cloth. The melody is older than the singer's grandmother, older than the road itself. The words are ordinary enough, wind, rain, mountain. Yet they contain a strange pause, a hidden turn of phrase, as though a message is folded inside the lullaby. A shrine ledger with missing pages. The ink continues for years, then suddenly a gap. Not a torn corner, but an entire absence. And then the writing resumes, as if nothing happened. The offerings are listed: salt, rice, sake. Yet the reason for the missing pages is not named. It is simply not there. A family register that changes its own handwriting. At first, the brushstrokes are confident and flowing. Later, the style shifts, thicker, sharper, as though written by a different hand. And then it shifts again. Names appear, vanish, return slightly altered. The same household becomes two households. A birth year moves. A surname becomes a whisper. Some believe this is evidence of survival. The way a tree bends in strong wind, reshaping itself so it does not break. Others believe it is evidence of deliberate mist, ink used not to reveal, but to confuse. And in the center of it all, the ember still floats above the courtyard, refusing to die. Beneath the silence, we begin to feel what the burning truly means. When an archive vanishes, it does not only remove information, it changes the shape of longing. It turns history into a room with missing walls, where every sound becomes an echo. It forces later generations to build stories from shadows, filling gaps with myth, with romance, with fear, with admiration. It invites contradiction, because absence invites imagination. And yet, absence also protects. It protects the kin who would have been named. It protects the methods that would have been hunted. It protects the quiet agreements that worked best in darkness. The sacred tension remains, like a thread pulled tight between two hands. To be remembered is to be seen. To be seen is to be vulnerable. To be vulnerable is to be taken. Perhaps the archive burned because someone understood this too well. Perhaps they chose ash over capture. As the chapter nears its end, the ember finally fades, and the courtyard becomes only shadow and gray dust. Night air cools the charred beams. The silence deepens into something almost comforting, like a blanket settling over the shoulders. Near the collapsed storehouse, beneath a lantern that no longer burns, a bowl of water has been left. The water is still, and yet it holds a reflection. Firelight, though there is no fire now. A trembling glow, like memory itself, present without being explainable. A light that remains after the flame is gone. not as proof, but as yearning. Whispers tell us that this is how history survives when records do not as certainty, but as reflection, as echo, as dust that clings to the fingertips of anyone who reaches too far into the past. And perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the earliest names were offered to flame so that the living could keep breathing in peace. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as the lantern's reflection shivers once more across the bowl, we let the question remain unanswered, soft and sacred, until it dissolves into sleep. It is said that the truest secrets do not live in locked chests or buried chambers. They live in habits, in forgotten corners of the earth. They are villages that do not announce themselves. They appear the way a thought appears just before sleep, soft, unquestioned, and already half-dream. The opening is small and intimate. A reed mat lies at a threshold, its woven fibers darkened by last night's rain. A simple bell hangs at a shrine gate, damp rope wrapped around its neck like a quiet vow. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, and pine needles, those long, thin brushes of a mountain, hold droplets that fall one by one, as though time itself is learning to move slowly. Beneath the silence, a village rests under tall pines. It is quiet, ordinary, almost tender, yet the air feels layered, as if every footstep has been taught to soften itself, as if even the wind has learned to pass through without disturbing what sleeps beneath. Whispers tell us that this is Iga, not the Iga of bright legend, not the Iga of thrilling tales, but the Iga of daily life, a place where secrecy is not an act, but an atmosphere, not a performance, but a way of keeping breath steady in a world that sometimes arrives with fire. The path through the village is stone-lined, curved like a river rather than straight like a command. Water channels run beside fields, carrying mountain coal down into rice paddies that mirror the sky. Even the fields feel attentive, their rows neat as script. The village does not shout its purpose. It simply endures. Where memory fades, the land becomes a book written in textures. A bent blade of grass, a footprint that appears, then stops. A bird call that does not return. Some believe the shinobi were simply farmers first, people whose hands knew soil more than steel, people who learned to read danger the way one reads weather, not through alarms, but through subtle shifts. A column of smoke that rises too straight, a dog that does not bark at the usual hour, the absence of insects in a corner of the field, the sudden hush that makes even sparrows seem cautious. It is said that in a land like this, attention becomes sacred, not the sharp attention of fear, but the steady attention of those who love what they must protect. The eyes learn to gather details the way a shrine gathers offerings, quietly, patiently, without needing applause. Marked by the moon, the village holds its routine like a prayer. Morning comes without urgency. Hands sweep thresholds. Water is carried. Rice is measured. Clothing is mended. A child laughs once, then the sound is gently hushed, not from harshness, but from instinct, as if the village has always known that sound can travel farther than intention. And in the center of this calm, the spiritual context enters like mist through cedar. A shrine at the edge of the village, modest and old. A torii gate darkened by rain. Stone steps softened by moss. Offerings placed with the kind of care that suggests the unseen is not distant here. The bell at the gate is rung softly, once, then allowed to fade, and the fading is part of the ritual. Some believe there were mountain practitioners in these ridges, yamabushi, moving between peaks like living shadows. Not ghosts, not demons, but human beings shaped by solitude and steep paths. They walked with staffs that tapped stone like slow heartbeats. They carried prayers on breath, as if the breath itself could be trained into protection. They did not speak of glory. They spoke of endurance. They spoke of humility, the kind that teaches you to disappear, not because you want to be admired, but because you want to live and keep others living too. Beneath the silence, a soft contradiction begins to form. The world imagines the shinobi as solitary figures, one shadow against the night, one name whispered in a corridor, one pair of eyes behind a mask. It is a story that pleases the imagination, The lone wanderer, the secret hero, the singular mystery. But the truth, if we listen carefully, may have been communal. An art held by many hands, passed like seed, guarded like a family name. Not a single blade, but a woven net. In this village, secrecy feels less like an individual skill and more like a collective agreement, something taught gently through example, the way elders teach children to bow at the shrine, or to walk carefully near sleeping animals. We begin to notice objects that carry an almost sacred presence, not because they are rare, but because they are quiet. A rope ladder, coiled neatly in a storage corner, resting like a sleeping serpent. Its fibers smell of hemp and rain. It does not look like a weapon. It looks like a tool, one that could save a life without needing to harm another. A small pouch of herbs, tied with faded string. The scent is bitter and green medicine, not poison. Protection, not spectacle. It reminds us that survival is often the oldest craft. A charcoal stick, worn down from use, kept in a dry nook near a post. With it, a message can be marked on wood or stone, quick, discreet, and just as easily erased with spit and thumb, returned to blankness like a tide washing ashore. It is said that the village itself was a kind of archive, not written on paper, but written in routines. The way lanterns were placed to avoid casting long shadows. The way doors were closed softly, never slammed. The way strangers were noticed without staring. The way paths curved so sightlines broke naturally. The way everyone understood that protection was shared. Whispers tell us that in such a place, trust becomes architecture, not spoken loudly, not promised dramatically, but built into the spacing of homes, the timing of bells, the careful covering of flame. As the day leans toward dusk, the village grows even quieter, not with fear, but with habit. Lanterns are dimmed early. The soft glow pools near thresholds like warm water. Doors are closed without trembling hands, not because danger is certain, but because caution has long ago become comfort. The pine canopy darkens overhead, and the air turns cool enough to feel on the skin like a whispered warning. Somewhere beyond the last house, the shrine bell shifts in the wind, but does not ring. And in that almost ring, the chapter finds its ending. A melancholy wonder settles over us. Perhaps the greatest secret was never technique, never daring, never the sharp edge of legend. Perhaps the greatest secret was the quiet agreement to protect one another. Beneath the silence, the village remains, veiled by pines, held by mist, marked by the moon. And as the lantern light softens, we let the village fade, not into forgetting, but into sacred uncertainty. Perhaps it was never meant to be seen clearly. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, we listen and we drift. It is said that rain remembers everything it touches. It taps the world with patient fingers, and the world answers in quiet, stone by stone, leaf by leaf, breath by breath. In forgotten corners of the earth, there's a shrine where the rain falls so steadily that it seems less like weather and more like ritual. A torii gate stands in the downpour. Its wood has darkened to the color of old tea, and the rope of straw draped beneath its crossbeam hangs heavy with droplets that fall like slow punctuation, one then another. Each drop is a pause. Each pause feels like a sentence being written in water. Beneath the silence, the listener steps into the shrine courtyard. Moss spreads across stone steps like a green cloak. Lanterns lean at gentle angles, softened by time. And near the base of a weathered pillar, a stone fox watches, half buried in moss, its face rounded by centuries of rain, yet its gaze still sharp, as if it has been waiting for the right kind of quiet to arrive. Marked by the moon, though the moon is hidden behind clouds, the atmosphere feels veiled, sacred, and inward. Here, the mystery does not ask, "What happened?" in a loud voice. It asks something softer. What vows were spoken in Iga, and to whom? Not only to elders and kin, not only to the living, but to the unseen, to kami that move through cedar branches, to ancestors whose names were whispered, then protected by silence, to the mountain itself, old and listening, holding the valley like a closed palm. Whispers tell us that in places like this, secrecy can be a form of devotion, not secrecy born from fear, but secrecy born from reverence, the kind that understands some things grow stronger when they are not displayed. Some believe the shinobi's restraint was not merely strategy, but spiritual discipline, a practice of silence, of controlling breath, of letting ego thin like mist until it no longer casts a shadow. And so we move slowly through fragments, as though turning pages that were never written. A prayer carved faintly on a wooden tablet, its ink bleeding at the edges from years of damp air. The words are ordinary at first: gratitude, protection, endurance. Yet there's a phrase that returns like an echo. Night work. Not explained, not celebrated, simply named, as if the shrine and the people both understand what the world must not. A small offering placed at an unusual hour. A bowl of rice left while the village sleeps. A pinch of salt set beside a stone basin. A cup of sake poured with a hand that leaves no footprints in the mud. In the shrine records, the offerings are listed carefully: rice, salt, rope, candle, but the purpose is omitted. The ink continues on, steady and calm, as if the omission is not a mistake, but a vow. Where memory fades, the omissions begin to feel louder than the words. Beneath the silence, forbidden knowledge gathers, but not as spectacle, not as treasure, as reverence. It is the feeling that something stands behind the curtain, breathing softly, and that the curtain is meant to remain. We walk through the courtyard as if we are walking through a chamber of listening. Rain beads on cedar leaves. A faint stream forms along the edge of a stone, curving in a spiral before it disappears into the earth. The world itself writes symbols here: spiral, echo, dust, without needing ink. Some believe that an oath spoken in such a place would not be shouted. It would be breathed. A vow shaped to fit inside the mouth without escaping into the wind. Because the wind travels, and in a time when power moved like fire, spreading quickly, consuming what resisted, there was wisdom in letting promises sink into the ground rather than rise into the air. Whispers tell us the oath may have been political, a binding of families into a secret league, woven together so tightly that no single strand could be easily snapped. In a valley like Iga, where survival often meant cooperation more than command, an oath could have been the quiet architecture beneath everything. Who would shelter whom? Who would warn whom? Who would carry messages like hidden seeds through winter? Yet others believe something even older. They believe it was simply the human promise to survive, spoken not to kings, but to the unseen. A vow to keep children breathing through harsh seasons. A vow to protect elders in fields and water. A vow to preserve a way of life without demanding the world's approval. The historical contradiction arrives gently, like rain at the edge of a roof. Later generations would write manuals and tales. They would draw diagrams. They would name techniques. They would create a story the world could hold in its hands. But this shrine, older than those ink pages, holds only hints. No full explanation. No proud record. No clear origin. Only offerings without reasons. Only fragments of prayer. Only the steady discipline of what was not said. It is said that when something is sacred, it is often hidden, not because it is shameful, but because it is fragile, because it can be taken. And perhaps the shinobi understood this not only as strategy, but as faith. To move unseen is to practice humility. To keep silent is to honor the unseen. To let the ego thin like mist is to become part of the valley's breath. Beneath the silence, the listener begins to sense that the shrine does not simply witness history. It shapes it, by refusing to hold it too tightly, by letting it remain partly veiled, by allowing what is most important to live in practice, not in proclamation. The rain slows. The courtyard darkens into late afternoon. And then, softly, almost tenderly, there is the sound of a bell. Only once. A single ring that rises into the damp air, clear and brief, then dissolves into the sound of falling water. The bell does not insist on being heard. It does not demand attention. It rings, and then it lets go. We listen as the note fades, thinning into silence the way breath thins as sleep approaches. And with that fading comes a quiet certainty. Some histories are not lost by accident. They are placed carefully into silence, like an offering. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in full. Perhaps it was meant to be felt, like moss under fingertips, like rain on cedar, like a vow spoken inward, where no enemy could overhear. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight we listen, and we let the shrine keep its oath, still veiled, still sacred, still whispering beneath the rain. It is said that a map is a promise that the world can be held in the palm, a promise that a road will remain where it is drawn, a promise that the unknown can be made obedient with ink. But in forgotten corners of the earth, there are maps that do not promise at all. They hesitate. They whisper. They disagree. The opening is candlelit. 2 maps are spread across tatama mats, their edges held down by smooth stones, river stones, worn patient by water, as though they have practiced holding things in place for centuries. The candle flame trembles in the quiet, bending with each small draft like a reed in a night wind. Wax drips in slow spirals, pooling pale on the floor. One map is drawn by an outsider. Its lines are bold, its labels confident, its borders clean as if cut with a ruler's gaze. Mountains are shaped into tidy symbols. Rivers are named without doubt. Villages are pinned into certainty, each one anchored by ink as if it cannot move. The other map is different. Sketched in faint ink, it looks less like a claim and more like a confession. Notes crowd the margins like whispers, small, careful strokes that seem afraid of their own sound. Routes curl like smoke. Paths vanish mid-line, as though the hand drawing them chose to stop speaking. Blank spaces spread across the paper like veils, intentional and quietly powerful. Beneath the silence, a question arrives like starlight through paper. Which map is true, and why do they refuse to align? Whispers tell us that this is how IGA begins to reveal itself, not by showing what it is, but by showing what cannot be agreed upon. In a land shaped by ridgelines and cedar shadows, certainty is not always a virtue. In such mountain regions, knowledge of paths becomes a sacred currency, traded with caution and guarded with care. Some believe the shinobi's first art was not the blade, nor the mask, nor the myth. It was cartography of the unseen, not only where roads go, but where sightlines break, where sound carries across water, where footsteps vanish into pine needles, where a traveler can become part of the night, simply by choosing the right bend in the path. Here, a map is not a picture of the land. It is an instrument of survival. Where memory fades, the land itself becomes a living manuscript, written not in ink but in sensation. The chill of a hollow where fog gathers. The way a ridge hides a valley until the last moment. The way a shrine bell can be heard farther on damp nights, and barely at all on dry ones. On the outsider's map, the mountains are obedient shapes. On the whispered map, the mountains are teachers, and teachers do not give answers all at once. The chapter drifts into the geography of deception, not deception for cruelty, but for protection. A hidden path is not always meant to mislead a stranger. Sometimes it is meant to preserve a family. A blank space is not always ignorance. Sometimes it is mercy. A missing river name is not always an error. Sometimes it is a lock, marked by the moon, whether the moon is visible or hidden behind cloud. The valley secrets seem to glow brighter in omission than in ink. We introduce the neighboring shadow of Koga across the passes, not as rivalry sharpened into drama, but as another hush-filled realm, parallel traditions, overlapping rumors, stories that braid and unbraid like strands of smoke. Across ridges, another set of families learned similar lessons from similar landscapes. The curve of a path, the patience of silence, the virtue of vanishing at the right moment. In old tales, IGA and Koga are sometimes held like opposing mirrors. But the maps remind us, borders and mountains are rarely clean. The wind does not respect them. Mist crosses without permission. Stories travel like birds. The outsider's map prefers straight answers. It draws lines that do not question themselves. But lived knowledge is curved, local, and quiet, like a stream that refuses to run in a straight line because the stones are older than the idea of direct. The whispered map follows the land's true temperament. It curls where the valley curls. It avoids what must be avoided. It suggests rather than commands. A meditative contradiction grows in the candlelight. Official chronicles want the world to be stable, but a hidden world survives by remaining fluid. In the blank spaces, the listener senses forbidden knowledge, not in what is drawn, but in what is not. A river is shown, but not named, as though naming it would summon attention. A shrine is marked only by a dot, no kanji, no detail, as though to write it fully would be to betray it. A village is left uninked entirely, not even a symbol, as though it never existed. And yet, a faint note in the margin says, in a hand that feels almost like breath, do not go here when the fog is low. Or, listen for the bell before crossing. Or simply, empty. Empty. A word that, in such places, does not mean nothing. It means hidden. It means protected. It means alive in the dark. It is said that the most powerful map is the one that teaches restraint, because the act of seeking can be a kind of violence. To look too hard is to disturb. To name too loudly is to expose. To trace every path is to invite the world to follow. So the whispered map does something strange and sacred. It instructs the reader not only where to go, but where not to go. Not because the land is cruel, because the land is delicate, because lives are braided into these valleys like roots, and roots tear when pulled too suddenly. The candle flame shrinks. It gutters, wavering like a breath nearing sleep. Wax pools like pale snow near the stones, softening their shadows. The room darkens, and the maps lose their edges, becoming two quiet islands floating in a sea of dim light. The outsider's map, so confident, begins to look rigid, almost naive in its certainty. The whispered map begins to look like a prayer. Not a prayer for knowledge, a prayer for discretion. Beneath the silence, the maps remain misaligned. And perhaps that is the final teaching. Perhaps the truest map is not the one that reveals everything. Perhaps the truest map is the one that protects what must not be found. Whispers tell us some places survive by refusing to be fully drawn. And as the candle finally fades, leaving only the soft darkness of the room, we allow the question to remain unanswered, veiled, sacred, and unresolved. Perhaps it was never meant to align. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight we listen, and we let the blank spaces keep their quiet power. It is said that every hidden place has a heartbeat, not loud enough for the world to hear, but steady enough for the people inside it to sleep. And then, sometimes, the heartbeat changes. In forgotten corners of the earth, there comes a night when the air grows unfamiliar, when even the crickets seem to pause, as if listening for something that has not yet arrived. The chapter begins with distant thunder that is not thunder, a low rolling sound carried across valleys. It does not flash like lightning, and it does not smell like rain. It is deeper than weather, slower, more deliberate. Drums, perhaps, struck far away, their rhythm traveling over ridgelines like an omen that refuses to hurry. Beneath the silence, lanterns are covered. Soft hands move through homes with practiced care, drawing cloth over flame until the light becomes a muted ember. Doors are latched. Wooden bars slide into place with a sound as gentle as prayer. Not panic, habit. Not chaos, discipline. A hush spreads through Iga like a veil drawn over a sleeping face. The pines do not sway loudly tonight. The mist arrives early, drifting into courtyards and along stone paths, as if the valley itself is trying to disappear. We do not speak of conquest in sharp words. We speak of a turning, a slow moment when the outside world pressed inward with heavy certainty, and the hidden place, so skilled at remaining unnamed, was forced to name itself. Where memory fades, history does not always vanish. Sometimes it gathers like fog, thickening around a particular year until the year becomes a shadow. We drift into the historical memory of Oda Nobunaga's campaigns against Iga, not as a lesson, but as a sorrowful tide that moves in two long breaths. The first breath is a warning, a quiet stone in the riverbed of time. The world beyond the mountains tests the gate. The ridgelines feel watched. Paths that once belonged only to villagers and mountain practitioners begin to carry different footsteps. The valley listens, and the listening becomes heavier. It is said that in those days, even the birdsong sounded altered, brief, cautious, as if the trees themselves had learned to hold their breath. Then comes the second breath, a deeper night. Whispers tell us that iron banners appeared along the ridges, like dark leaves that did not belong to the season. The disciplined outside world, hungry for certainty, moved with force that did not ask permission. The valley that had survived by quiet agreements now faced a question it could not answer with silence alone. Some believe the mountains tried to protect Iga. Mist thickened in passes. Rain softened the ground. Paths that were normally clear became slippery, veiled. But steel does not always care about weather. Fire does not always care about prayer. The listener is guided through images that arrive gently, like dreams that carry sorrow without shouting. Smoke rising where there were once kitchens and lullabies. Ash drifting across cedar boughs, like gray blossoms. Footsteps that do not stop. The world imagines the shinobi as masters of escape. And this is where the chapter's contradiction turns tender and painful, because history suggests that many could not vanish from fire and force. This does not diminish the myth. It gives it weight. It reminds us that the art of disappearing is not magic. It is a discipline practiced against probability. And sometimes probability arrives as an army, large, relentless, certain. Beneath the silence, we feel the cost of being hidden. At first, secrecy protects. It turns villages into veils. It makes paths curve like smoke. It teaches a community to keep light small, sound soft, ego thin as mist. But secrecy has a shadow of its own. The more hidden a place becomes, the more it can be misunderstood, the more it can be feared, the more it can be targeted not for what it has done, but for what it might be capable of doing. The forbidden knowledge here is not technique. It is the price of living in a valley that survives by refusing to be fully known until the world decides that refusing is an offense. It is said that when the outside world pressed inward, the night itself changed. Roofs went dark, not only because lanterns were covered, but because the sky seemed to dim with smoke and grief. The familiar outline of home became uncertain. A house that had always stood in the same place could become a silhouette, then a ruin, then an absence. And yet, even in this sorrow, the chapter does not hurry. We linger in the sacred slowness of what remains. A shrine bell that does not ring, but still hangs. A stone fox statue half buried in ash, its gaze still sharp. A path through pine needles that still curves as if guiding someone unseen. Some believe that after such nights, the land keeps remembering in its own way, not through records, not through proclamations, but through atmosphere, through the way mist gathers at the same bend in the valley, century after century, through the way the river carries gray dust without complaint, through the way cedar trunks hold scorch marks like silent scripture. As the chapter draws toward its closing, we return to water. A river moves through the valley, calm and persistent. Its surface reflects dusk sky blue, the last light of evening, and for a moment it looks almost peaceful, until the ash begins to fall. Tiny flakes settle on the water like pale petals. They do not sink immediately. They float, weightless, drifting on the surface as if they are uncertain where to go now that they have been released from flame. Marked by the moon, though the moon is still hidden, the ash begins to travel downstream, carried away without sound. The final reflection arrives softly, like a hand smoothing a blanket. Even the most careful veil can be torn, and yet the spirit of a place may linger, quiet, stubborn, unseen. Perhaps the valley is not only what was burned, perhaps it is also what survived in the spaces between smoke. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, we listen to the river, to the drifting ash, to the silence that follows a night when roofs went dark, and we let that silence remain unresolved, sacred, tender, and still breathing until it becomes part of sleep. It is said that some names arrive like wind through a paper screen, soft, unmistakable, and gone before you can hold them. Beneath the silence of a mountain night, a single figure kneels beside a lantern. The flame bends with the wind, bowing and rising again as though it is listening. The ground is damp. Pine needles glisten. Mist hangs low, veiling the world in a quiet, sacred blur. A name is spoken gently, Hanzo, half legend, half footprint. And we approach this figure the way one approaches a locked gate. Slowly, respectfully, aware that the stories around him are layered with performance and longing. In forgotten corners of the earth, a name like this becomes more than a person. It becomes a doorway, a mirror, a vessel where many voices are poured until they sound like one. Whispers tell us that Iga, the hidden valley of pines and oath-bound families, once lived by a different rhythm, quiet, watchful, trained by mist and ridgeline. And beyond those mountains, the world of lords was tightening like a knot. The age demanded banners, alliances, and proof. It demanded the turning of keys. So the story drifts toward a bridge, one made not of wood or stone, but of trust, between Iga's veiled families and the rising household of Tokugawa Ieyasu. In later retellings, an Iga man becomes the key that turns history's lock, guiding a lord through danger, escorting him along shadowed routes, carrying him through the night as if the night itself had opened a secret corridor. The tale is often told with confident lines, like a map drawn by an outsider. But where memory fades, the real path becomes harder to see. How much is true record, and how much is a dream the nation chose to keep? It is said that loyalty can be a kind of vow, service offered in silence, rewarded with remembrance that may distort. The vow itself is sacred, yet the reward is complicated, because when history wants a hero, it gives the hero a name, large enough to hold an entire era's hunger for meaning. And the contradiction arrives, quiet and sharp as moonlight on a blade. The shinobi are defined by anonymity, yet the world insists on naming heroes. If a single man is crowned with legend, what happens to the many whose names were never spoken above a whisper? Beneath the silence, we begin to sense the unseen crowd behind the name Hanzo, farmers with trained attention, messengers who carried breath-slow secrets, shrine-keepers who knew when to ring a bell and when to let it sleep, all the quiet hands that shape survival, and then step back into mist. The lantern flame bends again, and the kneeling figure does not move. Near the lantern, small objects rest like symbols set upon an altar, each one saying something without shouting. An unused seal, cool and heavy, its bronze surface, dulled by time. It has the weight of authority, yet it is untouched, suggesting that this story, at its deepest, may not belong to official ink. Some believe the greatest agreements were never stamped. They were breathed, a letter folded into a crane. Its paper edges are crisp, but the folds are gentle. Careful hands have turned words into wings. The message inside is hidden by design, not by accident. A crane does not reveal, it protects. It carries meaning the way a river carries ash, quietly, downstream, away from grasping eyes. And a sword left untouched, not polished for spectacle, not raised for triumph, simply present, like a reminder that violence was not always the point. In the shadowed work of passage and survival, the sharpest skill may have been restraint, the ability to move through danger without becoming it. Whispers tell us the implied forbidden knowledge is not a secret technique, not a dazzling trick. It is the route itself, the invisible roads between factions, the hidden corridors of power, the places where sightlines break and sound carries, where a traveler can become part of the night by choosing the correct silence. In Iga's valleys, paths are not merely geography. They are covenant. Knowing a route is like knowing a prayer, one spoken only when necessary, and never repeated too loudly. And so, we drift through images that feel less like events and more like echoes. A mountain pass where mist pools like oceanic breath. A river crossing where stones form a spiral and the water refuses to speak. A shrine gate where rope hangs heavy with rain, and the world feels veiled by something older than fear. In each image, Hanzo remains both near and distant, like a lantern seen through fog. The name glows, but the face behind it stays softened, as if the mountain itself is reluctant to be read. Marked by the moon, the story becomes gentler still. Because perhaps Hanzo is not one person. Perhaps Hanzo is a vessel, an echo that holds all the unnamed, a mask that history can point to, so it does not have to admit how many hands carried the same quiet vow. And now, The lantern begins to dim. The flame shrinks, bending once more as if bowing toward the earth. The kneeling figure remains, patient as stone. The air cools. The mist thickens. The world becomes a chamber of listening where answers are not demanded. Then the lantern extinguishes, and the night does not panic. It simply becomes moonlight, soft silver on wet pine needles, pale glow on the unused seal, a faint shimmer along the folded crane's wings. The sword remains untouched, and the valley breathes as if it has always known how to endure in darkness. The chapter's final reflection arrives like a hush settling over a sleeping face. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in full. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, in the quiet after the flame, we remember that history often remembers the mask, not the face beneath. It is said that ink can be a kind of shadow, not the shadow of a body beneath sunlight, but the shadow of a thought, held in place so it cannot drift away. And yet, in forgotten corners of the earth, some thoughts were never meant to be held so tightly. Some were meant to move like mist, to vanish like breath, to live only in timing and silence. The chapter opens in a quieter age. The Edoira's rooms are calm and closed, their sliding doors breathing gently with the night air. Outside, rain has rinsed the garden stones. Inside, a single lamp glows, soft, warm, and patient. A brush dips into ink. The ink is calm, almost black blue in lamplight, like deep water at midnight. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the brush touches paper, and a line appears, smooth and deliberate. Another line follows. The sound is faint, like a moth wing against a lantern. A scroll unrolls across a low desk, its edges curling as though waking from sleep. Careful diagrams emerge. Measured phrases settle into place. The pages look orderly, almost serene, and yet the listener feels an ache. This is knowledge arriving late, like a song recorded after the singer has gone. Beneath the silence, the memory of smoke still hangs somewhere far behind the ears. IGA's darker nights, the ash, the torn veil, the vanished records, have already passed into the valley's hidden chambers. Now, in this calmer era, people begin to write down what was once guarded by breath and gesture. It is said that what survives fire often changes form. A living practice becomes a set of instructions. A whisper becomes a sentence. A glance becomes a diagram. Whispers tell us of ninja manuals, texts copied, hidden, preserved, sometimes attributed to IGA lineage. They are spoken of like relics, like forbidden doors, like the last remaining threads of a cloth that once covered an entire world. The scroll offers structure. It names tools. It lists principles. It draws the body's movements as if the body can be captured like a bird in ink. There are passages that read like prayers. There are sections that feel like law. The pages have the solemnness of a shrine ledger, the calm authority of a map. And yet, where memory fades, a sacred doubt rises. Were these pages faithful mirrors of older practice? Or were they reimaginings, ritualized memories shaped to fit a new age that wanted secrets safely contained? The contradiction becomes a lullaby. The very act of writing may betray the essence of what it describes. Because what was the essence? Some believe the shinobi's strength was never in a trick, but in restraint, in listening, in understanding when not to move, when not to speak, when not to be remembered. How do you write that? How do you diagram patience? How do you measure mercy? The lamp flickers slightly, and the ink catches a soft shine, like starlight on still water. We avoid sharp analysis. We let imagery guide us, like a hand guiding a child back into sleep. Smoke-stained fingers turn pages, not hurriedly, not greedily, slowly, as if each page is fragile enough to break with too much desire. The fingertips leave faint smudges, old soot mixed with ink, like a reminder that these teachings have passed through fire in more than one way. An apprentice kneels nearby. We do not see a face. We see posture, stillness, humility. The apprentice's lesson is not boastfulness, not daring. It is quiet discipline. Do not speak of what you know. Do not turn skill into performance. Let the ego thin like mist until it no longer blocks the view. A teacher pauses before a sentence. The brush hovers. There's a moment when the teacher's hand does not move, as though the next words feel too revealing. The page waits. The lamp breathes. The ink in the dish sits like midnight oceanic depth. Then, instead of clarity, the teacher writes metaphor. A blade wrapped in cloth. A fox crossing without leaving tracks. A bell that rings once and is gone. The forbidden knowledge is implied in omissions. Chapters that end abruptly, as though the writer stopped mid-thought and chose silence instead. Terms left undefined, like doors left unlabeled. Instructions that hint, then retreat, suggesting that if you truly want to learn, you must already know how to listen. Marked by the moon, though the moon is not visible here. Hidden beyond paper walls, the manual feels less like a complete unveiling and more like a veil of its own. Because perhaps the writers were not only preserving, perhaps they were also protecting. In an era that wanted secrets cataloged, controlled, and inherited like property, the manual offers something safer, a version that can be read, but not fully taken. A text that suggests more than it gives. A map that teaches what must not be found. It is said that a secret changes when it becomes portable. Once it can be carried, it can be stolen. Once it can be copied, it can be diluted. Once it can be taught without relationship, it can become empty. So the writers may have left gaps on purpose. Small sacred absences like blank spaces on a whispered map. Not errors. Locks. The lamp grows quieter. Outside, the garden stones shine faintly with damp moonlight. Inside, the scroll's ink begins to dry. Black-blue turns matte. The lines settle into permanence, and in that permanence there's both comfort and loss. The final reflection arrives softly, as if from a distant room. Perhaps the truest teachings were never written at all. Perhaps they lived in timing, knowing when to arrive and when to vanish. Perhaps they lived in listening, reading the weather of footsteps, the language of silence. Perhaps they lived in mercy, choosing restraint when the world expected spectacle. And now the brush is lifted. The last stroke ends without flourish. The writer does not sign boldly. The room remains hushed, and the scroll lies open like a sleeping creature, breathing faintly in lamplight. Beneath the silence, a quiet question remains, one that does not demand an answer. What is preserved when words survive? And what is lost when silence is translated? Perhaps it was never meant to be fully preserved. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight we listen, until the ink dries, the lamp dims, and the pages fade gently into sleep. It is said that every name is a small lamp, a syllable that once warmed a room, a sound that once turned a head, a mark that once meant, I am here. And yet, beneath the silence of old storehouses, names can become something else, lighter than ash, quieter than mist. The opening image is simple and haunting. In a dim corner of a wooden storehouse, a bamboo basket rests on the floorboards. Its weave is tight, patient, made by hands that understood endurance. Dust lies in the seams like pale flour. A thin line of light slips through a crack in the wall, and in that narrow beam we see what the basket holds. Small wooden tags, each one inked with a name. Some names are clear, dark strokes still sharp after years. Others are smudged, as if a thumb brushed them away in haste, or in mercy. Some have been rewritten over older marks, the new ink sitting atop the old like a second skin. A few are scratched through entirely, leaving only ghosts of letters, half seen, half denied. Beneath the silence, the listener feels the weight of the question without it being spoken aloud. Who were these people before they became legend? Where memory fades, lineage becomes an oceanic thing, always moving, always reshaping its vessel. This chapter turns away from battlefields and famous names. It leans instead toward the quiet architecture of belonging, the clan tapestry of Iga, woven not from grand proclamations, but from generations who lived close to earth, close to shrines, close to secrets that were not glamorous, only necessary. Whispers tell us that families carried history the way water carries silt, not neatly, not perfectly, but faithfully, in its own wandering way. A village house appears ordinary to the stranger's eye, wood, paper doors, a low hearth. Yet within the ordinary, Signals passed between neighbors like breath. A lantern hung slightly higher than usual. A bundle of reeds left near a gate. A rope coil placed where it can be seen, from one angle only. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just small arrangements of the world that say, be careful. Or it is safe. Or not tonight. It is said that in IGA, trust was not an emotion. It was infrastructure. Marriages bound not romance alone, but alliances of endurance. Households braided into one another like roots, sharing not only food and labor, but silence. A daughter married into another family and learned a new rhythm of caution, a new set of unspoken rules. A son carried water from a stream and learned to notice when the stream sounded different, when a bird call paused too long, when smoke rose too straight. Stories were told to children, softly, at the edge of sleep. They sounded like bedtime tales, foxes, travelers, hidden shrines, moonlit gates. But tucked inside the rhythm were instructions disguised as wonder. How to walk without snapping twigs. How to pause before crossing open ground. How to listen for the absence of insects. The tales soothed the child and trained the future. Some believe these families were protectors hired by the powerful. That lords sought their skills the way one seeks a rare medicine, quietly, urgently, without wanting the world to know. In such a telling, the valley becomes a workshop for secrecy, and the clans become instruments in the hands of greater banners. Others believe something more intimate. They believe these families were protectors of their own valley first. That concealment was learned the way winter preparation is learned, because winter arrives whether you are famous or not. Because danger does not ask permission. Because survival is an old teacher, and it teaches quietly. A contradiction enters like a chill breeze through cracked wood. Later fame paints these clans as mythical shadows, figures without faces, names without bodies, symbols drifting through popular imagination. The shinobi become masks. The clans become legends. The valley becomes a stage. But the surviving fragments suggest a quieter truth. Farmers, messengers, scouts, mountain practitioners, all braided together. Not separate casts of mystery, but a single woven organism, living, adapting, sharing. The clan is not a single house. It is a pulse across many houses, a network that breathes in unison when the ridgelines begin to feel watched. Beneath the silence, the basket of tags begins to feel like more than storage. It feels like a confession. The forbidden knowledge here is the true roster. Who belonged, who taught, who broke away, who changed a name to survive. The burned records, those darker chapters of ash, make every genealogy feel like a half-remembered dream. A name appears in one place, disappears in another, returns slightly altered. A family line bends, splits, merges. A surname is softened, like a stone worn by water, until it is barely the same word. And yet the basket holds them all, inked, smudged, rewritten, as if refusing to let them vanish completely. Marked by the moon, the listener imagines the hands that touched these tags, hands that wrote a name, then hesitated, hands that blurred it with a thumb, hands that wrote a new name over the old, not to lie, but to protect, because sometimes to keep a face safe, you must let the name become a veil. Sometimes to keep a lineage alive, you must allow the record to become fog. The storehouse air is cool. Dust floats in the light beam like tiny star-marked specks, drifting slow as sleep. The basket remains still, yet it feels full of movement, water memory, family memory, the quiet shifting of identity through dangerous years. We do not demand certainty. We do not force the tags to become a clean list. Instead, we sit with the tenderness of incompleteness. Because perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that names were lost, but that faces were turned into symbols. A person becomes a story becomes a myth becomes a mask. And yet, in that loss, there is dignity, an old, sacred choice to let the self dissolve into the protection of the whole. At the end, the lid of the basket is lifted and then lowered again, not slammed, not sealed in fear, closed gently, as if tucking a child into bed. The wooden tags disappear beneath woven bamboo, and the storehouse returns to its quiet darkness. The names remain inside, breathing softly in their own way, held not by paper, not by ink, but by the care of those who understood what must be hidden. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully recovered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as the lid rests in place, we let the basket keep its gentle secrets until the last light fades and sleep carries us onward. It is said that the deepest halls are not built of stone. They are built of silence. In forgotten corners of the earth, where mountains fold over valleys like cupped hands, there exists a chamber that cannot be found on any confident map. It is not a throne room, not a place of banners, not a hall where history announces itself. It is a small room, nearly empty. A reed screen stands like a pale veil. The floor is bare, the air clean. And in the center, a single candle has been lowered until the flame barely lives, so small it looks like a firefly trapped in prayer. Beneath the silence, the question is whispered, not spoken. What if the true weapon was not the hand, but the ear? The listener steps into this chamber as if stepping into a ritual. The mind slows. The shoulders soften. Even the breath becomes careful, as though the room can hear it. Some believe the shinobi art, at its oldest root, was not spectacle but attentiveness. Not a talent for striking, but a devotion to noticing. Not the drama of action, but the discipline of restraint. And so we enter the spiritual texture of patience. Breath becomes a metronome. In and out, steady as water moving over stone. The candle flame responds to each exhale, bowing slightly, then returning. Silence becomes instruction, not empty, but full. Full of tiny signals that ordinary life ignores. Where memory fades, the smallest changes begin to speak. A faint creak in the wood outside the screen, too early to be wind. A footstep that pauses when it should continue. A distant dog that barks once, then falls silent, as if corrected by something unseen. The chamber teaches that hearing is not simply receiving sound. It is reading the world. We drift through scenes of careful observation, like slow images in a dream. A watcher studies shadows lengthening on a wall, not for beauty alone, but for timing. How long a body takes to cross a doorway. How quickly a lantern's glow shifts when someone passes between flame and paper. The shadow becomes a quiet calendar, marking minutes with soft edges. In another scene, attention rests on conversation. Not the words, but the pauses. The breath taken before a lie. The hesitation after a name is mentioned. The way a sentence ends too neatly, like a door closed too quickly. Beneath the silence, a gate closes too fast. The latch clicks with unusual urgency. The sound is small, but in the chamber it becomes a bell. A signal. A ripple that says, something changed. It is said that in a world of shifting alliances, listening is sacred. Because alliances announce themselves in noise, marching, shouting, proclamations. But betrayal often arrives quietly. It arrives as a difference in routine, a missing bird call, an extra heartbeat in a familiar step. Some believe IGA's skill was born from being surrounded. Mountains, rivals, lords. A valley pressed between powerful forces becomes exquisitely aware of change, the way a leaf becomes aware of the slightest wind when winter approaches. To survive, the valley learns to sense what cannot be proven. It learns to hear the shape of danger before it enters the door. And here, a historical contradiction deepens the hush. Popular tales want swift action and bright feats, leaping rooftops, flashing blades, dramatic escapes. The world loves a story that moves quickly, that sparkles, that ends with certainty. But the surviving hints suggest something else. Long waiting, modest movement, the discipline of not being seen. If the shinobi existed as the stories claim, then much of their work would have been invisible even to those nearby. Because the most successful act is the one that leaves no evidence it occurred. So the chamber teaches a quieter heroism, to remain still while the world rushes, to listen while others speak, to let the ego thin like mist until it stops casting a shadow. The forbidden knowledge is implied in what cannot be described. How to vanish without hatred, how to move without ego, how to carry information like a secret prayer, never dropping it, never flaunting it, never letting it become heavy with pride. Because pride is loud. Pride leaves tracks. Pride demands recognition. But listening asks for the opposite. Listening asks you to become smaller, to become empty enough that the world can pass through you and leave its meaning behind, like wind passing through pine needles, leaving only the sound of its truth. Marked by the moon. Though the chamber has no window wide enough for moonlight, only a thin crack in the reed screen. Starlight is sometimes visible as a pale thread. It rests on the floor like a quiet ribbon, reminding the watcher that even the sky teaches attentiveness. Stars do not shout. They simply remain. We feel the ache of the burned records here, but in a different way. Perhaps the records were not only destroyed by flame. Perhaps they were always destined to disappear, because the practice itself evaporates the moment you try to hold it. How do you archive stillness? How do you record the exact timing of a pause? How do you write down the art of noticing what is not there? The chamber becomes a place where absence is honored rather than feared. A place where not knowing is not failure, but fidelity to the nature of the craft. The listener begins to understand. The more you attempt to pin this art down, the more it slips away, like mist in sunlight, like ash in river water, like a whispered vow that was never meant to become a proclamation. The candle flame grows smaller. It trembles once more, then steadies, then shrinks again until it looks like a single ember clinging to existence. The room is utterly quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels ancient, like the hush inside a sealed shrine. Finally, the candle extinguishes, and the darkness does not feel empty. It feels full of listening. Only starlight remains, threading through the crack in the screen, faint and unwavering. The listener is suspended in a calm, melancholy wonder. No conclusion offered, no certainty demanded. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the chamber holds its quiet, we drift towards sleep with the gentle understanding that vanishing is not always loss. Sometimes vanishing is peace. It is said that borders are lines drawn by voices, but mountains do not listen. In forgotten corners of the earth, there is a ridge path under thin moonlight, where the wind crosses from one province to another as if names and boundaries are only suggestions. Pine needles shiver. Mist clings to stone. The air tastes of cold water and distant cedar smoke. A traveler moves slowly along the ridge, not hurried, not searching for triumph, only listening, because in places like this, the world speaks most clearly through what it does not say. Beneath the silence, the chapter turns toward a neighboring name that often appears beside IJ, like a mirrored shadow. Koga. We do not force a rivalry. We treat it as an echo. Two valleys, two sets of families, two traditions that the world later braided into a single myth, as though human lives were threads meant for storytelling rather than breathing. Whispers tell us that Koga is not merely a footnote, not merely a reflection. It is its own hush-filled realm, shaped by ridges and forest, by cautious routines, by agreements older than the ink that tried to capture them. The traveler does not see a grand gate announcing arrival. The traveler feels the shift the way one feels a change in weather, subtle, undeniable. And then the question arrives softly, like starlight settling on rock. If two valleys learn to vanish, how do we tell them apart once the world begins to sing about them? We explore how stories travel across mountains, not on the backs of armies, but on the tongues of ordinary movement. A rumor carried by merchants. It begins as a sentence spoken at a roadside stall. It travels in baskets of salt and cloth, in the creak of cart wheels, in the patient rhythm of footpaths. By the time it reaches the next valley, it has already changed shape, names shifted, details smoothed, edges sharpened to fit attention. A song overheard at an inn. The inn is dim. The fire is low. The night outside is thick. A traveler hums a melody that belongs to no one and everyone. It mentions a hidden valley, a shadowed pass, a man who moved without sound. But the valley is not named, or it is named differently each time, as if the singer is unsure, or perhaps protective. A lord's letter sealed in wax. It is folded tightly, carried by careful hands, passed from threshold to threshold. The seal is unbroken, Yet the air around it feels heavy, because even unopened, it contains intention. The letter crosses the ridge, and with it crosses an invisible current, power seeking what it cannot fully control. In these passing whispers, Iga and Koga sometimes swap faces. The story that belonged to one becomes attributed to the other. A technique becomes a rumor. A family becomes a symbol. The world does what the world always does when it cannot see clearly. It fills the fog with shapes. Where memory fades, the contradiction grows gentle but persistent. When records are burned or thin, imagination pours into the gaps. And the gaps, over time, become sacred in their own way. Not because they are accurate, but because they hold longing. The listener is guided through symbolic images that feel like dream mirrors. Two shrines facing different suns. One shrine catches morning light first, its torii glowing faintly with sandstone warmth. The other waits for afternoon, bathed in cooler, misty green shade. Both bells ring the same note, yet the echoes drift differently through the trees. Two rivers that never meet. They run in parallel through separate valleys, each carrying its own stones, its own silt, its own quiet history. They never join, yet they share the same sky, the same rain, the same moonlight on their surfaces. A traveler could drink from either and still taste mountain cold. Two maps that share a blank space where truth should be. On one map, the blank is called Iga. On another, it is called Koga. The ink hesitates. The paper holds a veil. The blank does not mean nothing. It means protected. It means alive in secrecy. It means not for outsiders to own. The forbidden knowledge is implied in the overlaps. Shared techniques. Shared teachers. Shared ancestry, perhaps. Things that would dissolve the neat categories later generations prefer, because neat categories are comforting, and comfort loves certainty. Yet living communities are rarely neat. They intermarry. They trade. They borrow. They adapt. Wind crosses ridges without asking permission, and so do ideas. It is said that secrecy produces reflection. Once hidden, everything becomes easier to project upon. A masked figure becomes whatever the listener needs. Hero, villain, phantom, savior. A valley becomes a legend factory. A name becomes a vessel. And so Iga and Koga. Two real places with real fields, real shrines, real children learning the sound of rain, are slowly turned into symbols. The traveler pauses at the ridge's highest point. From here, the valleys on both sides are veiled by mist. The moon is thin, like a pale coin behind cloud. The wind moves across the pass, touching both provinces, with the same cold fingertips. The traveler hears it in the pines, in the hollow between stones, in the faint creak of a distant shrine rope. The same wind on both sides. And in that sameness, a quiet truth settles. Perhaps the real story is not which was greater. Perhaps the real story is how easily history turns living communities into masks. How easily the human becomes legend. How easily a valley becomes a stage. Whispers tell us that the mountains keep their names hidden for a reason. Not to tease the world, but to protect the living from being swallowed by the stories told about them. Because if the world insists on making symbols, the mountains answer with mist. They soften details. They blur borders. They refuse to let certainty settle too hard. They keep the people inside their veils, human and breathing, not fully captured by ink or rumor. As the traveler stands listening, the wind continues, steady, unclaimed, oceanic in its patience. Perhaps it was never meant to be separated cleanly. Perhaps the echo was always part of the truth. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as the ridge path fades back into mist, we let the two valleys remain what they were before the myth. Places of quiet endurance, where the mountains hold their names close, and the living are allowed to remain unseen. It is said that fire is loud, but water remembers longer. In forgotten corners of the earth, where mountains fold around valleys, like old hands protecting a small flame, the final chapter opens not with smoke, but with a stream. Moonlight trembles on the water's surface like a soft lantern. The current moves through stones with patient ease, polishing them the way time polishes grief, slowly, without argument. Somewhere downstream, ash has long since dissolved. The gray dust that once fell like snow has been carried away, blended into riverbed silt, hidden beneath reeds. And yet, something remains. Beneath the silence, a question arrives as a lullaby. If the records were burned, what still speaks? We do not answer quickly. We listen, the way the valley has always listened. The stream seems to carry voices, not words, not sentences, but the feeling of something trained, something careful. The listener senses that this water has passed shrine steps and rice fields, has slipped through cedar shadows, has touched stones that once heard footsteps chosen for quietness. And so we gather fragments like sacred offerings, not to build a perfect archive, because perfection is not the point, but to hold the remaining pieces with reverence, the way one holds a bowl of water without spilling. A shrine bell rung at an unusual hour, not a festival bell, not a celebratory call. A single ring in the deep night, then silence again. It is said such a bell can be a signal, a prayer, or both, sound used with restraint, the way light is used under a veil. A family proverb spoken softly over evening rice. A simple phrase about patience, about not boasting, about moving like mist when the world grows sharp. It sounds like ordinary wisdom until you feel the second meaning underneath. A lesson passed down not for glory, but for endurance. A manual written after the flames. Ink trying to hold what breath once carried. Diagrams drawn with careful hands that pause before revealing too much. Omissions that feel like locks. Metaphors wrapped around instructions like cloth around a blade. The pages survive, but the essence remains partly out of reach, as if the valley itself insisted on leaving a veil intact. A famous name that may be a mask for many. Hanzo, spoken like a footprint in fog. A name that glows because history prefers a single lantern to a sky of starlight. Yet beneath the name, countless lives moved quietly. Messengers, farmers, scouts, shrine keepers, mountain practitioners. The unnamed, whose discipline was their dignity. Whispers tell us that each fragment is a kind of record. Not the record the world wants, clean, complete, stamped and dated, but the record that refused to burn because it was never made of paper. It was made of practice, of timing, of restraint. We return gently to Iga, not as a place of spectacle, but as a quiet field of endurance. The listener feels the circle closing, the way a story's last breath returns to its first. Curiosity becomes wonder. Wonder settles into melancholy. Melancholy softens into acceptance, because the central contradiction is not meant to be solved like a puzzle. It becomes a kind of peace. History demands clarity, yet the shinobi legacy lives in partial light, half shadow, half starlight. Where memory fades, the mind wants to fill the gaps with certainty. But in Iga's atmosphere, mist, cedar, stone, water, certainty has always been treated carefully, like a flame that can expose as much as it warms. The implied forbidden knowledge is not a hidden technique. It is the quiet truth that secrecy itself shapes memory. It bends memory the way wind bends grass, subtle, constant, changing the direction of what we think we know. When something is hidden, the imagination projects. When records are thin, stories grow thick. When names vanish, legends bloom. And yet the stream keeps moving, indifferent to our desire for perfect answers. It is said that the most precious record is not ink on paper. It is the echo of discipline, the art of moving gently through a dangerous world without making more noise than necessary, to step softly on stone, to speak only what must be spoken, to leave no wound in the air, to protect without announcing protection. This is the record that refused to burn, because it was never trapped inside an archive. It lived in the body's timing, in the ear's patience, in the shared agreement of a village beneath pines. We endure together, quietly. Beneath the silence, the stream seems to approve. It passes over stones and does not cling. It carries away ash and does not complain. It keeps going, as if reminding us that survival is often unremarkable and therefore sacred. And now the night begins to loosen its grip. We move toward dawn. A stone gate appears in the distance, ancient, weathered, half softened by moss. Mist lifts slowly, like a veil being raised not for revelation, but for breathing. The gate does not open onto a grand truth. It opens onto the same mountains, the same ridgelines, the same quiet paths that curve out of sight. Nothing new is revealed, and yet everything feels complete. Because perhaps the story was never meant to end with proof. Perhaps it was meant to end with feeling. The comfort of unanswered truths. The gentle warmth of mystery held without struggle. It is said that some stories were not meant to be fully recovered. They were meant to be felt, like breath in the dark, like a candle's last glow, like moonlight trembling on water. And as the mist continues to lift, and the stream continues to speak in its wordless way, we let the final thought settle over us like a soft blanket. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight we have listened. And now, with the mountains quiet and the gates standing patient, we allow the story to fade, sacred, incomplete, and calming, guiding us gently into sleep.